Just before we start our service talk, we just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing my wife and I to come down to share this weekend with you. As usual, we eat good when we go on speaking assignment. It was exceptional this time. We really appreciate that. And what a loving gesture to allow my mother-in-law to come with us. So we really, really appreciate that, and we just wanted to say thank you. You did a nice job with our Watchtower discussion, with our Bible study, the young ones and all of their comments. And I was very interested to see how Brother Gebhardt was going to handle the Watchtower, because this is the first gathering that I've been to where we had a bodyguard there as well. He was at the gathering with us last night. He just kind of stood around as the bodyguard. So it's good to see he's a spiritual man too. Okay. And Brother Hardy, good job reading. So we appreciate that. And we want to mention our landlord, Sister Shoemaker, and the welcoming party, the marshals. They really made us feel at home. But let's talk just a little bit about Jehovah's Table. Jehovah's a great host. And being a great host, Jehovah has made arrangements for us to be at his table. And what a wonderful host that he is. Let's turn to the 23rd Psalm and let's see what the psalmist has to say about our Heavenly Father, Jehovah. Here in the 23rd Psalm, it tells us right away that Jehovah is a host beyond compare. And Psalm 23 and verse 5, the psalmist says of Jehovah, "You arrange before me a table in front of those showing hostility to me. With oil you have greased my head, and my cup is well filled." Well, do you recognize what the psalmist is saying? In order for someone to host someone, there's usually preparation involved. There's a lot of forethought. There are arrangements that have to be made. And here the psalmist said that Jehovah has already arranged a table for him. He said, "You arrange before me a table in front of those showing hostility to me." So he's saying that in a time when others would not be favorable, as we learn with Enoch, walking with God, at a time when there's hostile environment, he says, "Jehovah, you've still arranged this table for me. You have it right here." And look at what he said in verse 5. In verse 5, he says, "With oil you've greased my head, and my cup is well filled." Well, oil at that time, it denoted prosperity. It gave the connotation of a person exulting with joy. And in times of travel, in Bible times, they didn't have automobiles, planes or trains. So most of the time your travel was just on foot. At best you might have a beast of burden, but usually you arrived there kind of dirty and dusty and wore out. So what the host would do, they would kind of rub you down and grease you down with oil. They'd have oil on hand. If nothing else, you wouldn't be ashy as you sat at the table. So the psalmist said, "With oil you've greased my head." Now, picture yourself being invited to someone's home for a meal, and before you ever eat a meal, they kind of rub you down and give you a little massage and kind of rub you down. How would you feel? You walk in and you smell the food. It's like, whoa, it's going to be a great evening. But before you even eat, they rub you down. You kind of tell them, "Brother, just kind of get this side over here." Now, well, that's what he's saying about Jehovah. He says, "You've arranged the table, and with oil you've greased my head." You see what he said in verse 5? He concluded, he said, "And my cup is well filled." So he tells us that at Jehovah's table, we have everything we need right there at Jehovah's table. We don't have to go rummaging around in the camps of the wicked one. There's nowhere else we have to go to try to find sustenance and something that's going to keep us alive. He said, "Everything I need right at your table." What a host. "With oil you've greased my head, and my cup is well filled." I have everything I need right here at your table. Jehovah's made those arrangements. Look at verse 6. You consider verse 6 together. He said, "Surely loving kindness," he said, "surely goodness and loving kindness themselves will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Jehovah to the length of days." Well, here the psalmist is telling us that if we stay at Jehovah's table, if we just sit right there at Jehovah's table, did you notice what he said would pursue us? He said, "Loving kindness and goodness will pursue me all the days that I'm at Jehovah's table." He said, as long as I'm there, loving kindness and goodness will pursue me. Have you ever been pursued by something? Now, I don't mean someone, but something. Have you ever been pursued by something? How would you feel if you were being pursued by a pit bull? I mean, it's in pursuit of you. Due to its nature, they've been expelled in many countries. They're not even allowed to bring that dog into the country. But how would you feel if you knew a pit bull was pursuing you? Or how about a snake? You know, due to its nature, it's attracted to warm-blooded animals. That's you and I. You know a snake can detect heat the way our hearing detects sound? You could be somewhere and someone makes a sound and right away our ears kind of detect it and we can kind of identify where that sound's coming from. You know, that's where a snake is. There's a warm-blooded animal, a warm-blooded creature there. That snake will automatically start pursuing it. You decide to lay down and take a nap in the desert, you better get up somewhere high and build a fire around you. Because the snake can pursue you. But he said that's not what happens when you're at Jehovah's table. The psalmist said just kind of wake up just a little bit and look and see what pursues you at Jehovah's table. What did he say pursues him? He said loving kindness and goodness will pursue us all the days we're at Jehovah's table. Now, this reminds us of a story one of the district overseers told us here in the United States. He's one of the black district overseers that we have here in the United States. And when he first started in his traveling work, he was a circuit overseer. And at that time, due to segregation in the United States, even the brothers and sisters in our organization were separated. We don't like to say they were segregated. We like to say they were separated. So you would have the black circuit overseer, he would serve the black congregations. You'd have the white circuit overseer, he would serve the white congregations. Well, the brothers tell us, well, Mac, we're in the Deep South. Deep South. I won't mention the name of the state to protect the innocent and the guilty. And he says, we're on our way to our first congregation that we're serving. And we had a little friend of ours. She was in the back seat with my wife and I, and we're traveling. We're on our way, and we have the directions, how to get to the home of where we're going to stay. And he said as soon as they started out, they kind of passed a little in cove there, and there was a pickup truck. He said it was one of those pickup trucks you can see the rifle in the window. And he says as they took off, the pickup truck pulled out and started following them. And they drove a little ways, and he kind of noticed it. He was hoping his wife and the other sister didn't notice it, but sooner they caught on. And everywhere they would turn, this pickup truck would turn. Well, now, he said, Mac, we already had 3 strikes against us. He says, now, 1, we were Jehovah's Witnesses. He said, 2, we were black. We were in the Deep South. I'll tell you the 3rd strike in a minute. But as they continued to travel, he said, well, surely this person's not going to go everywhere we're going to go because this map has us going back in the woods. But everywhere they would go, this pickup truck would go. You know, when the brother sped up, the truck sped up. He said, well, I know how to do this. We'll just we'll go down to the right. We'll make a left. According to the map, we go a few ways, and we make another left, and then we can get back on the main drag. And surely that truck won't do that. And every turn he made, the truck turned. Trucks just following him. Well, he said by now, he says, we just decided that, well, I'm going to pull over and I'm just going to see what this is all about. Now, he told his wife, because by now they know exactly what's going on. He's telling his wife, he says, now, you stay in the car, you and the sister stay in the car, and I'm going to walk back in and see what happens. He told his wife, now, don't leave me. Just kind of stay in the car. Now, he said, remember now, we already had 3 strikes against us. 1, we were Jehovah's Witnesses. He said 2, we were black in the Deep South. He said 3, we were in a Volkswagen. You ever try to outrun somebody in a Volkswagen? So he said we couldn't outrun him. So right at the time he pulled over on the side of the road, when he's finished explaining to his wife and his sister how they might want to handle themselves, before he could get out of the car, there's a knock on the door. He said it was a hard knock too, Mac. It was one of those. Roll the window down. That's what the man said. He kind of paused. He said his heart was beating. No moisture in his mouth. He was kind of scared. So the man knocked on the window again. He said, roll the window down. He said he kind of cracked the window just a little bit in the deepest voice he could. He just said, yes, can we help you? As if that was going to do something, he said. He said, the man said, are you Jehovah's Witnesses? He said, that was already one of the strikes against us. He just says, yes, we are. He said, the man said, I thought so. My mother's one of you people, and she told me the black traveling overseer was coming in. I've got all kind of food and blankets and non-perishables back here in the truck. I've been following you. You made quite a few turns there, didn't you, buddy? He said he said, you know what we learned, Mac? We couldn't run from a blessing. He said, as hard as we tried, we couldn't run from that blessing. That man was there because his mother was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. She was there. He was there because his mother explained, the black traveling overseer is coming to town. I want to make sure that they have all that they need. You see, loving kindness and goodness will pursue us all the days if we just stay at Jehovah's table. We can't run from a blessing if we just stay at Jehovah's table. But guess what? Guess what the nation of Israel did? You probably won't believe it. Guess what they did? Would you believe they left Jehovah's table? Here the psalmist said, we have everything we need. No need to go rummaging around in the camps of the wicked one, trying to find something that we need. And Israel left Jehovah's table. Now let's turn to Jeremiah chapter 2. Here in Jeremiah chapter 2, this is so shocking. It's so unbelievable that, do you know that the angelic creatures in heavens, they just couldn't believe it? They said, well, we can't believe what we're seeing. We can't believe that God's chosen people are leaving Jehovah. In Jeremiah chapter 2, let's look together at verse 12. Here's what Jehovah said. Stare in amazement, O you heavens, at this, and bristle up in very great horror, is the utterance of Jehovah. Because there are two bad things my people have done. They have left even me, the source of living water, in order to hew out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot contain the water. Jehovah said, stare in amazement, O heavens, you won't believe it. He said, bristle up in great horror. You won't believe what my people have done. Jehovah said, they left me, the source of living water. And what did they leave Jehovah for? They didn't even leave him for a well. A well is a source of water. They left Jehovah for a cistern. Now, a cistern is just a little piece of rock, a little cavity of rock that catches rainwater as it runs off. That's all. It's not a source of water. And then this cistern, Jehovah said they left me for a broken cistern at that. Can you believe that? That one of the members of the governing body, Brother Barber, told us when we first went to Bethel, he told us of a brother who left Bethel because he didn't want to get his hair cut. Now, at Bethel, we get our hair cut every 3 weeks. That's law. You know, that's law at Bethel. Every 3 weeks, the brothers, you're going to go and you're going to get your hair cut. Now, if you don't want the barbers at Bethel to cut your hair, you got to go somewhere and get your hair cut. But every 3 weeks, you get your hair cut. You know, the brother refused to cut his hair. Brothers had to pull him to the side and counsel him and talk with him. He's like, oh, no, you can't cut my hair. It has nothing to do with me being a minister. You know, after series of discussions and counsel, you know, that brother was willing to leave Bethel and not to cut his hair. He left Bethel because he didn't want to get his hair cut. Well, he went home. It's not a knock against anyone from Florida, but he went back home to Florida. Went home. Well, he had to do something. He had to get a job. Got on at Disney World. At that time, Disney World, they ran a tight ship. They said, well, you know, we'd like to hire you, nice young man. We want to hire you, but you're going to have to get your hair cut. Do you know he cut his hair? Oh, stare in amazement, oh heavens, and bristle up in horror. There are two bad things my people have done, Jehovah said. You know, he cut his hair. He cut his hair to work at Disney World and wouldn't cut his hair to work at Bethel. You know what Brother Barber said? Brother Barber said he wouldn't cut his hair for Christ's brothers, but he cut his hair for Mickey Mouse. He said he wouldn't cut it for the Messianic kingdom, he cut it for the magic kingdom, and wouldn't cut his hair. Stare in amazement, O heavens, and bristle up in great horror. But that's what the nation of Israel did. They left Jehovah for a broken cistern. They put faith and confidence in the surrounding nations, and they didn't put confidence in Jehovah. In Jeremiah chapter 2, look at verse 18, what the Bible tells us. This is what the nation of Israel did. Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 18, Jehovah asked the question, and now, what concern should you have for the way of Egypt in order to drink the waters of Shihor? And what concern should you have for the way of Assyria in order to drink the waters of the river? We'll tell you now, not all the young people are with us. They have more concern for Egypt. Egypt pictures the world. They're not with us right now. They're sitting here, they're trying to make a show of it. They're trying to put on a pretense that they're not with us. What concern, Jehovah is saying, I've made arrangements for you at my table. You have everything you need. Why are you trying to go run around in the camps of the wicked one when he's arranged a table for us? Their hearts are divided. Satan, the devil, and the wiles of the wicked one, he's putting too much in front of them. They can't see it clearly. You know, even some of the parents can't see it. Some of the parents, they're just indifferent. They're kind of here. Jehovah said, stare in amazement and bristle up in horror. You wouldn't believe what my people have done. And Jehovah's arranged a table for us. You know, if you only knew how the members of the governing body and the faithful and the discreet slave, if you only knew how they feel about you. See, there at Bethel, we hear their prayers. Never think it's just a group of men behind a building printing literature. It's not that way. It's not that way. Those brothers are praying long and hard for you. They recognize what you're going through. They know you're out here on the front lines. They know it can't be easy. We hear their prayers. We know their concern that they have for you. You know, the members of the faithful slave, you know they feel directly responsible for each and every member of the great crowd. Did you know that? You know that they feel responsible for you? They feel that if anything happens to you, maybe in some way, in some small way, they've been insubordinate to Christ. They haven't done their job. So that they do all that they can to try to make it plain. They understand what you're going through. Never think they don't understand. Number one, they're human themselves. Number two, they're members of the Christian congregation. They attend meetings when they don't feel like it. Did you know that sometime the governing body, they meet on Wednesday? They meet every Wednesday. You know, sometime their meetings run past 5 o'clock. They break for lunch. They start at 8:30. They break for lunch. And sometimes their meetings run past 5 o'clock. We had the district convention with one of the members of the governing body, and he told the crowd, and my wife and I said, oh, that's good. We're glad he mentioned that to the brothers. You know what he told them? He said, we meet every Wednesday. And sometime our meetings run past 5 o'clock. We've been there all day discussing the Bible in the household. They have the worldwide scope. They have the brothers and sisters. They have lives in their hand. And they meet all day discussing God's Word, the Bible. He says, you know, my school of service meeting is on Wednesday. He says, sometime the last thing I want to do is go to another meeting. He said, but you know what I do? I go to the meeting, and I'm always encouraged. They know what you're going through. Why would a member of the governing body need to stress himself to go to a meeting? They recognize what you deal with. You're on the front lines. You're in the trenches. They're responsible for you. And they want to do all that they can to help you to stay at Jehovah's table. I know one time, just to show you how in tune they are with you, I know one time I was a new elder. Now, Rodney saw me grow up at Bethel. He saw me walk into New York from Bethel, and I'm an elder now, so I'm a new elder, and we're going to go on a shepherding call. And I did a lot of research. The packet was about that thick, as the brother said, and it was hot every time I read it. Well, I was ready. Now, some mornings, one of the members of the governing body, he would be down early that morning doing his Bible reading, just meditating. So sometime we would be able to go over and talk with him. Well, this morning I went by and I said, well, this was Brother Sidlick, the brother with the deep voice. I said, you know, Brother Sidlick, I'm ready to go on a shepherding call. He said, that's good, Mac. The brothers need shepherding. I see. I knew I was in line. So I wanted to show him what we had. Now, he couldn't possibly add anything to what I had. I just kind of wanted to show him. I said, Brother Siddick, this is what we're going to share with the brother. I kind of handed it to him all proud. Yeah, this is kind of my research. I just kind of stepped back like, yeah, he's going to see. I can do some research. He took what I had. He started looking at it. He looked up at me. He looked down again. He looked up at me. He said, Mac, you don't get it, do you? I was offended. I said, what this brother talking about? I don't get it. I did all the research and half of what he probably wrote. I don't know what he means I don't get it. He says, now, Mac, according to the circumstances you explained to me, because I explained it to him, the brother's circumstance, he says, you're going to share this with him? Now, by now, I was backpedaling a little bit. I said, well, we were going to share it with him. I'm stepping back now. Well, you know, we were thinking about sharing that with him. He said, Mac, the brothers don't need this. Now imagine how I felt. Did all this research, ready to share this with the brother. He said, Mac, the brothers don't need this. He said, now, based on what you explained to me, it's something you don't get. He said, just the way the women show up to work nowadays is sexual harassment. They don't even have to say anything to the brother. The way they show up at work nowadays is sexual harassment, and you're going to share this with him? He said, they don't need this. They need to know that you feel. Well, I caught on. I took what I had and I threw it in the garbage. Now, here's the funny thing. As I was leaving the dining room with my head hanging down, he called out to me, Mac, you're barely in the truth. He told me I was barely in the truth. But then I caught on. I began to realize the love and the concern that they have for you. How they feel of all that you're going through. And we hear it in their prayers. We're able to hear it and see it in their discussions that they have with the Bethel family. Now, from time to time, we have Bible discussions by members of the governing body and other responsible brothers. Well, one night we heard a landmark talk. Anybody that was at Bethel, they'll never forget that talk. It was landmark in all of our lives. And it happened to be Brother Siddick. He gave the talk. Now, he started his talk. He said, we're going to talk about something you know very little about if you will ever understand it. That's the way he started his talk. He said, I'm going to tell you now, we're going to talk about something you know very little about if you will ever understand it. He says, we're going to talk about Jehovah's loving kindness. You know what pursues us all the days that we stay at Jehovah's table? He said, we're going to talk about Jehovah's loving kindness. Now he said, there's a new king in Israel. This is his introduction. Now, usually when there was a new king in Israel, there'd be great times for the family of the new king, but horrible times for the family of the old king, because usually all the boys in the family of the old king, they were killed. They were wiped out for fear they'd come back for revenge. He said, there's a new king in Israel. It's King David. He said David did something that was shocking. It was unprecedented. No other king had ever did this before. Let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 9. He's helping us to appreciate Jehovah's loving kindness. He's helping us to appreciate how Jehovah feels about us. And brothers and sisters, this is the way the governing body, the faithful slave, this is the way they feel about you. In 2 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 1, and I'll pick up the account, the narrative said, and David proceeded to say, is there yet anyone that is left over of the house of Saul, that I may exercise loving kindness toward him for the sake of Jonathan? Well, you see how different this is? David is looking for someone of the household of the old king. No one ever did this before. And why? He says that I may exercise loving kindness toward him. Verse 2. Now the house of Saul had a servant whose name was Ziba. That's significant. The verse says, now the house of Saul had a servant whose name was Ziba. So they called him to David, and the king then said to him, are you Ziba? To which he said, I am your servant. He said, I'm your man. I know what goes on in these households of royalty. I've been in the house of Saul all my life. I know what goes on behind these walls. I know who belongs here. Ziba says, I'm your man. He was used to the house of Saul. Verse 3. And the king went on to say, is there nobody of the house of Saul anymore, that I may exercise toward him the loving kindness of God? You see, it's God's loving kindness. This demonstrates Jehovah's loving kindness. And the brothers are in tune to this. The governing body, they recognize Jehovah's loving kindness, and they want us to recognize it too. But the verse continues. At that Ziba said to the king, there is yet a son of Jonathan lame in the feet. Now, what he was saying is, wait a minute, king. Now, don't go too far. I know you want to exercise loving kindness, but don't go too far. The only person who's left, he's a cripple. He doesn't belong in these households of royalty. He's lame in both of his feet. He's telling the king, well, he's the only one that's left. And he doesn't belong here with us. But look at what the Bible tells us. Then the king said to him, where is he? So Ziba said to him, look, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lodabar. Brother Siddiq said, Lodabar! Lodabar. He said that was the ghetto. It was across the tracks. It was a barren place. It was a wasteland. Only thorns and thistles survived there. No one but undesirables and, yes, cripples would live in Lodabar. Brother Siddiq said, that's the man I'm looking for. He said, David recognized that's the one I'm looking for to show loving kindness to. He said, you go and get him and you bring him here. He said that pictured Jehovah. That pictured Jehovah, and Jehovah's looking for individuals to show loving kindness to. Now, regardless of what you pay for your mortgage, you're in the ghetto. Oh, don't think for 1 minute you're not in the ghetto. We're all in the ghetto, brothers and sisters. We live in a wicked and a dying and terrible world. It's nasty outside. And the only way we're going to survive all of that is based on Jehovah's loving kindness. Jehovah says, that's the type of people that I'm looking for, that I may show loving kindness to them. Well, for those of us that were still alive at the time when he's giving this talk, most of us had probably fainted. That's how powerful the talk was. You could hear a pin drop, and we were sitting on carpet. It was so quiet. Because we began to realize the love and the concern that they have for the household. So for those that had not fallen out, what he did next, the rest of us, we fell out. Remember the governing body, he's just talking to us. He's telling us how he feels about you. He reached down and he picked up a bell and he said, dinner time in David's house. Who would you expect to be at the king's table? In a house of royalty, in a home like that, it's dinner time at David's house. Who would you expect to be there at David's house, sitting at David's table? Now, if you remember, beauty ran in David's family. Everybody remember that? He was a handsome man. And beauty just ran in the family. Didn't do him much good, but beauty ran in the family. So who would you expect to be at the king's table? Remember the king's son? Do you remember Absalom? That's David's son. You hear the sisters? Absalom. Yeah. You know, Absalom, tall man, jet black hair, he looked like a king. You know, they cut his hair once a year. His hair alone weighed 5 pounds. Just his hair alone had weighed 5 pounds. So Absalom certainly has a place there at the king's table. It's dinner time in David's house. And who would be at his table? Why, his family would be there. Look at what the Bible tells us. 2 Samuel. We want to stick with 2 Samuel chapter 9, but this time let's just turn over to verse 14. 2 Samuel chapter 14, rather. 2 Samuel chapter 14, look at what verse 25 says about Absalom, David's son. Now compared with Absalom, there proved to be no man so beautiful in all Israel as to be praised so much. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there proved to be no defect in him. What a man! And Absalom is sitting there at David's table. Well, who else would be there? Who else would you expect to be at the king's table? You remember Absalom's sister, Tamar? You remember his sister Tamar? Oh, Brother Siddick, he explained Tamar to us that night. Now, the rest of us brothers, we were looking for Tamar that night. Oh, we love our wives, but we were looking for Tamar that night. The way he explained Tamar, what she probably looked like. The way she would smell and fill up the whole room and the whole table. Remember, she was so beautiful, her half-brother raped her. She was so beautiful, her half-brother raped her. And beautiful Tamar is sitting right there at the table. And he said she probably smelled like the fields of Lebanon. And she had the oil of Goshen on her. No perfume that we have today would compare with it. And there's Absalom, there's beautiful Tamar sitting at the table. Tamar smelling up the whole room. Beautiful Absalom, he's right there. Jet black hair, heavy locks on his hair. Who else would you expect to be at the table? It's dinner time at David's house. Probably Solomon. Brother Siddick said there he is at the end of the table, probably with his head buried in a book. There's studious Solomon, building the foundation for the wisdom Jehovah's going to give him. And there's Solomon, he's right there at the table. You know, David probably made room for his nephews too. Courageous Abishai. And then Joab, by now Brother Siddick strutting across the platform. He's showing us Joab walking in. He said Joab walks in, sun-baked, skin like tan leather, courageous eyes, the eyes of a killer. He said he walks in and he was cut. Sisters know what cut means. So he's showing us Absalom. He walks in and he just finds his place at the table. And all of a sudden you hear sklunk, clink, sklunk, clink, sklunk. With all of this beauty at the table, in walks a cripple. In walks a cripple who used to live in Lodabar. His name is Mephibosheth. You see, when the news came that his father and his grandfather were killed, the nurse that was running with him, he's only 5 years old, the nurse that was running with him, she dropped him, and from then on he was lame in both of his feet. And David said, that's the man that can sit at my table. He said, you go to Lodabar and you get him. Because he can sit at my table. Because it's the loving kindness of God. Now, probably, those other children and the nephews at the table, those beautiful people, they probably said, Dad, can he get his food to go, please? And that's when Brother Siddick lowered the boom on us. You know, not only are we all in the ghetto, he said, we're all crippled brothers. Adam and Eve dropped every one of us. We're all crippled. Every last one of us here in this Kingdom Hall, we're all messed up. And if you don't think you're messed up, that's what's wrong with you. You don't know you're messed up. You're like all the rest of us. We're all crippled. The problem is we make it hard on each other to stay at the table. We're looking at each other and wondering, what is he doing at the table? What is she doing at the table? It's hard to stay at the table the way we're treated at the table sometimes. It's something we know very little about, if we will ever understand it. It's Jehovah's loving kindness. And regardless of what has happened to us, regardless of what we've done, because see, Mephibosheth, he didn't understand it. He felt he had no reason to be at Jehovah's table. He couldn't understand it. Isn't that the way we feel sometimes? We feel like I shouldn't be at Jehovah's table. We feel I have no reason to be here with all these beautiful people. Think of Mephibosheth looking at Absalom and said, ooh, look at a beautiful man. David, can I be excused, please? David said, stay at the table. You look at Solomon and said, there's no way I measure up to him. All of that wisdom. Look at him reading books and everything. There's no way I'll be able to measure up with him. Excuse me, David, can I be excused, please? David said, stay at the table. Mephibosheth, a cripple. He looked at Tamar, beautiful Tamar. Brother Sidlick said, beautiful Tamar. And he looked at Tamar and how gorgeous she was, smelling up the room. And he said, I really shouldn't be here in her presence. Excuse me, David, can I be excused, please? And David said, stay at the table. How could he measure up to Joab and all of his courage? He probably looked at Joab. One of Joab's looks, he said, well, that'll kill me myself, so I don't want to be here at the table with him. But David always encouraged him, stay at the table. Jehovah is looking for people like you and I. Sure, you've sinned. You've made mistakes. You've compromised at times in your life. You've gone back on your word. There's stories about you. You don't want anyone to know. You feel, I'm not worthy to be at this table. Well, that's the way Mephibosheth felt. And when people commend us and they tell us how good we're doing and how encouraging we are, now we feel worse. We say, well, if you really knew how I was, you wouldn't say that about me. So now I feel worse. You ever felt that way? You know that there are some individuals that just pray to die. They said, Jehovah, just let me die. You won't even let me die even. But I'm not worthy of this. So we pray to Jehovah, Jehovah, just let me die. But Jehovah wants us to stay at the table regardless of what you've done. Are you struggling right now? Remember, a struggling person is not a bad person. You're just struggling. But it's Jehovah's loving kindness that's still pursuing you. He wants you to stay at the table all the days of your life. He wants you to know that you have everything that you need right here at his table. But we're hard on each other at that table sometimes. Very hard on each other. You see, Jehovah is a very loving and a forgiving God. Remember Manasseh? The Bible said Manasseh did on a large scale what was bad in Jehovah's eyes. He did on a grand scale what Jehovah disliked. Jehovah not only restored him, he forgave Manasseh, he restored him, and he put him back to the kingship. That's the God we serve. Now, as humans, we just don't do that. We see a person say, yeah, he's all right, but I remember what he did back in 1982. You'll look at the sister and say, yeah, she's okay, but I could tell you some stories about her. Allow each other to stay at the table. Be like Jehovah. Just welcome everyone to the table. We're all crippled. Adam and Eve dropped every one of us. There's things about us, sure, we've had hard times. We've compromised. We capitulated. We just didn't do what was right. The thoughts that come on our minds sometimes, even in the kingdom hall even, the things that we think about. But Jehovah's saying, stay at the table. Never feel that you're unworthy. He wants us to stay at the table. Now, let me explain this table to you. In these households of royalty, they didn't sit upright the way we sit upright in the Western world. Usually they would recline maybe on the hip or the elbow. That's the way they would kind of recline at the table. And then these tables a little bit lower, they would have these beautiful tablecloths, these long tablecloths, these skirts that would cover over the entire table. And so when these skirts covered the table, it would cover everybody's legs. So when Mephibosheth was at the table, he was just like everybody else. His legs were covered. You couldn't see his frailties. You couldn't see his imperfection. You couldn't see even that he was a cripple. And Brother Siddick helped us to appreciate that the skirt represented the ransom sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So Jehovah's telling us, you're covered at this table. You're covered at this table. Just stay at the table. Don't leave. Never leave the table is what Jehovah's telling them. It's the loving kindness of God. Let's go back to 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9. Let's look at verse 7 first of all. Because Mephibosheth, he couldn't understand it. Verse 7, and David went on to say to him, do not be afraid, for without fail I shall exercise loving kindness toward you for the sake of Jonathan, your father. And I must return to you all the field of Saul, your grandfather. And you yourself will eat bread at my table constantly. That's Jehovah's loving kindness. But look at Mephibosheth. Now, one of the worst things that you could ever be in Jerusalem would be a dog. Now, in Israel, the time of Israel, they don't view dogs the way we view them in the Western world. Here in the Western world, dogs have houses and sweaters, and we give them facelifts and operations and things like that. In the Western world, a dog was a dog. That's the worst thing you could be, was a dog. That's why it was so disgraceful for someone to die and the dogs to lick them up. That was bad. Look at what Mephibosheth said. This is how he felt about himself. Verse 8. At that he prostrated himself and said, what is your servant that you have turned your face to the dead dog, such as I am? He said, I'm not even a dog. I'm as bad as a dead dog. How are you turning your attention to me? That the way you feel sometimes? Say, Job, I'm just not worthy. I don't even think I'm going back to the kingdom hall. Let me write a letter or something. Let me tell the brothers I can't make it. I'm not worthy to be at your table. And Jehovah's saying, stay at the table. You're covered at this table. The ransom sacrifice of my son. It has you covered regardless of what you've done, what you've gone through in your life, whatever you're enduring, whatever struggle or trial that you have, stay at the table. That's what Jehovah wants us to do. And look at verse 11. So Ziba said to the king, in accord with all that my lord the king commands for his servant, is the way that your servant will do. But Mephibosheth is eating at my table like one of the sons of the king. He was like one of the sons of the king, a cripple. He's just like one of his sons. All of that beauty. But what did Mephibosheth good was the ransom sacrifice of Jesus. That's what does us all good. That's what makes us valuable in God's eyes. And finally in verse 13. And Mephibosheth himself was dwelling in Jerusalem, for it was constantly at the table of the king that he was eating, and he was lame in both of his feet. Lovers of God and those that fear God, do all that you can to always stay at Jehovah's table.